In this episode, I would like to talk to you about one of the coolest experiments that I've ever done. And I've not only done this experiment once, but I've done it twice, and I'm going to show you both of the results in this very episode. A few years ago, I was traveling from London to Scottish Highlands to do a hiking trip. And for those who know this journey, it's a very, very long journey on a train. It takes at least 8 to 9 hours. So I decided to take my favorite watercolor pencils with me, and I asked myself this question. What would happen if I did a drawing with all the colors, all the pencils available to me in my pencil set? This would happen. This is a drawing of a drapery when I used 24 different colors, and it's one of the coolest, weirdest looking, most interesting drawing I've done with color pencils to this very day. Now let's actually look at the actual pencil set. Now this is, for the full disclosure, second generation of the pencils. I did it with the first one, but the colors are exactly the same. They're identical. The quality is also identical. So what we can see here are 24 different colors. We've got our yellows, we have orange, pinks, reds, there is purple and blues, we have greens, some browns, black, white and grey. Now let's fast forward to this year, when I started experimenting with watercolor pencils. And I asked myself this question: what would happen if I did a painting with all the colors available to me, with all 24 colors in the pencil case? And I always had this experiment on the back of my mind because the drawing itself intrigued me so much. When I started painting with watercolor pencils, I was pumped. I was really excited to try this experiment. But before I show you the actual result, which is as interesting as the drawing, I think we should talk about a few downsides of such an experiment. This is definitely an extreme experiment in the sense of using excessive number of pencils, excessive number of different colors on relatively small format. And it is also quite an unorthodox way to paint with watercolor pencils. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it will look like a painting, but it may not necessarily look like a watercolor painting. Because watercolor paintings tend to be quite light. And if you use excessive number of pencils, that lightness may disappear. It is also quite a difficult experiment because you have to handle a lot of different colors on one tiny format. But what about the upside? The upside is that you can create interesting, very unconventional artwork. So let's have a look at my go at a painting with 24 different colors. This is a painting of a stylized rose. And I try to use each color at least 2 or 3 times to really embrace this experiment. The purpose of this series, which I call Endless Possibilities of Watercolor Pencils, is to inspire you to experiment with watercolor pencils painting. If you plan to do a similar experiment where you use 24 different pencils, there are 2 crucial tips which I think you should consider. The tip number 1 is to work in layers. Now, when I did the drawing of a drapery, I work in multiple layers which I carefully lay down on top of each other. And a similar thing applies in watercolor pencils painting. You have to work in layers. Usually you put one pencil pigment on the paper, then you mix it with water to create so-called wash. So you lay down multiple washes on top of each other. Usually I do one pencil, one color, sometimes 2 colors in one wash. But if I had to do 24 different washes or even 12 different washes, that would be crazy. So on average, I did 4 pencils in a one wash. The tip number 2 is about keeping a color balance. And this is very important whenever you do work with color. And especially because you're using so many different colors, you need to kind of balance the colors out in your painting. So if I use the light blue in this corner, I will try to replicate it in the other corner. You don't want to do it for all the colors, but you want to do it for most of the colors. Okay, so the 2 tips are to work in multiple layers, using multiple pencils in individual wash, and the second tip is to keep color balance. Using 24 different colors is definitely an extreme experiment, but you could potentially try to do the opposite. You could try to create an artwork with minimum number of pencils, which is something my colleagues and I did. We created a free masterclass where I show you how you can create amazing artwork with just 3 pencils. So if you would like to try the experiment or you would like to get introduced to watercolor pencils technique, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. A part of the experimentation process is to step out of your comfort zone. And I think this is an amazing experiment to do so, whether it is to draw or to paint with 24 different colors. So don't be afraid to try this experiment. You may be pleasantly surprised by its result. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully see you next time. Bye for now.